Hey guys, tonight we are going to explore an enchanting yet deadly beauty secret from the past. Imagine, in the 16th century, when someone said Snow White's complexion, they were not just referring to purity, they were talking about a status symbol, a lethal beauty worshipped by the English elite, with the central figure being Queen Elizabeth I. She was renowned for her commanding presence and porcelain skin, but behind that flawless base lay a chilling story. Night after night, she had to apply a layer of lead makeup to her face and rub mercury onto her lips, a beauty routine that may ultimately have cost her life. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious to know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, the ideal of feminine beauty was flawlessly smooth, alabaster skin. This aesthetic standard was venerated by the English nobility of the 16th century, with porcelain white skin symbolizing nobility and perfect beauty. Queen Elizabeth I embodied this ideal, regularly wearing a ghostly white layer of makeup that gave her an almost surreal, otherworldly appearance. Yet behind that flawless mask lay a horrifying truth. Her makeup was made primarily of white lead, an exceedingly toxic substance. Moreover, to achieve those full crimson lips, she also applied a mercury-based compound. It is even likely that she used a mercury-infused makeup remover, which ate away her flesh bit by bit. Our story will delve into how these cosmetics contributed to the Queen's death. In the age of the Virgin Queen, the highest standard of feminine beauty was smooth, radiant white skin. To attain this look, Elizabeth used Venetian ceruse, a cosmetic created from white lead and vinegar. She spread this mixture over her face and neck, transforming her pockmarked skin from a lifelong affliction into a strange porcelain canvas. Its odor must have resembled sour wine, but it was an effective tool for maintaining her perfect image. Thanks to 400 years of scientific progress, we now know that applying lead to the skin daily causes severe and often irreversible problems such as hair loss, skin deterioration, and even death from lead poisoning. In the 16th century, such a fate was virtually unavoidable. However, lead was not the only poison in her cosmetics. To achieve lips as red as blood, Elizabeth used a lip stain made from cinnabar, a toxic mineral containing mercury. Her famous portraits all depict those vivid red lips prominently set against a stark white complexion. Thus, two horrific poisons were working in tandem on her body over many years. The lead on her face slowly corroded her skin, while mercury absorbed through her skin and mucous membranes. To counteract her increasingly damaged skin, Elizabeth had to apply ever thicker layers of makeup. According to historical records, toward the end of her life, her facial cosmetics may have been as thick as 1 inch. Symptoms of mercury poisoning include memory loss, irritability, and depression, all of which Elizabeth experienced. She became forgetful, snapped unexpectedly at those around her, and seemed to sink into deep melancholy. This condition drove her to rely even more heavily on cosmetics to conceal both physical and emotional exhaustion. Whenever her skin appeared dull or rough, Elizabeth would order her ladies-in-waiting to bring more ceruse and cinnabar, layering on that thick white mask until her face seemed numb to feeling. In the dim candlelight of her private chambers, her ghostly visage lingered in the memories of all who saw her. It is also worth noting that nobles of the time seldom removed their makeup regularly. They might leave it on for an entire week or longer, believing that frequent cleansing would diminish the effect of their precious cosmetics. Elizabeth was no exception. She wore her mask for many consecutive days, and only washed when the peeling makeup became too unsightly. When she did cleanse her face, she likely used a concoction of crushed eggshells, alum, and mercury to scrub her skin, which left it momentarily soft, but simultaneously eroded. Each of these sessions made her skin increasingly fragile and thin, opening pathways for lead and mercury to penetrate deeper into her body. With such a specialized beauty regimen, it is no wonder Queen Elizabeth I's health gradually declined over the years. She endured many sleepless nights from severe headaches, and awoke in the mornings with lips numb as if stung by invisible insects and skin that felt like it was burning. Yet she continued to preside over her vast realm and manage her court with pride and unwavering determination. While her subjects and courtiers beheld her as a figure of majesty and strength, within her body, Elizabeth fought tirelessly against the very toxins she had brought upon herself. In the age of Queen Elizabeth I, nobles did not cleanse their faces each evening. Most modern women have been guilty of that lapse at least a few times, but for Elizabeth it was a deliberate ritual. After her ladies-in-waiting applied the lead and mercury makeup to her royal countenance, the Queen would leave it in place for at least 1 week. This practice not only clogged her pores, but also allowed the white lead to seep deeper into her skin, turning it an ashen grey and causing it to sag and wrinkle. When Elizabeth finally removed her mask of beauty, historians believe she may have used a dreadful concoction of crushed eggshells, alum, and yes, mercury. Some claimed that this mercury remover left their skin feeling unnaturally soft, but in truth it was ruthlessly stripping away living layers of flesh, a brutal treatment regarded at the time as an advanced cosmetic procedure. Yet when she was still a young maiden, the Queen did not adorn herself with such heavy artistry, not only because she was youthful, but because she had not yet contracted the disease that would forever alter her fate: smallpox. On the 10th day of October, in the year 1562, she was struck with a violent fever and displayed every dread symptom of the pox. Courtiers trembled with fear, convinced she would perish within 7 days. But against all odds, the young queen survived. Unfortunately, the illness left permanent pockmarks across her face during those turbulent years of her 20s, a time often described as either a bed of roses or a field of thorns. In a society where flawless appearance was paramount, such scars could condemn a woman's reputation and prospects. Elizabeth did not face this tragedy alone. Her close friend Mary Sidney suffered the same fate. Mary's husband, Henry Sidney, lamented, "The scars, in the deepest unease of her soul, have ever remained upon her face." In the cutthroat atmosphere of the Tudor court, where whispers and gossip carried more weight than steel, Elizabeth spared no effort to conceal her blemishes. She understood that beauty was not merely vanity, but a potent instrument of power, an armor against slander and scrutiny. She could not allow any would-be suitors or scheming courtiers to glimpse the vulnerability those scars represented. Thus, Elizabeth's beauty routine became a form of courtcraft, a performance she maintained day after day. Under flickering candlelight, she would instruct her attendants to freshen the lead and cinnabar admixture on her cheeks and lips, padding on layer after layer until her face was as thickly masked as a porcelain doll. The very imperfections she sought to hide, uneven texture, discolored patches, minute depressions, were buried beneath that ghastly veneer. Even as her skin grew ever more damaged by the corrosive substances, the Queen persisted, knowing that to reveal anything less than perfection was to risk her throne's stability. Night after night, similar scenes played out in her private chambers. Elizabeth, draped in velvet and satin, would sit before an ornate mirror, eyes half closed in weary resignation, while her ladies carefully applied each toxic layer. Outside her door, the hush of the palace corridors seemed to echo her own slow breath, as if the entire court were pausing in her vigil. No word of complaint escaped her lips. She viewed the ordeal as necessary, a small price to pay for maintaining the illusion of an eternal, untarnished sovereign. And when at last the mercury-infused remover was applied, the sensation of flesh being abraded from her face was met with stoic endurance, a testament to her iron will and the grim realities of her era's beauty standards. Over time, the repeated cycle of covering and stripping away exacerbated her condition. Her skin, once resilient, became fragile and thin. The mercury etched microscopic wounds that never truly healed, and the lead accumulated in her tissues, unseen but insidious. Yet Elizabeth remained convinced that each application brought her closer to the pristine ideal she and her court so cherished. When she ventured into public, whether to preside over council meetings or to address her subjects, her visage shone with a mask-like brilliance, concealing both her years and her suffering. Despite her determination, the Queen's health inexorably declined. Sleepless nights, chronic headaches, and bouts of melancholy grew more frequent. Physicians of the day, constrained by rudimentary medical knowledge, found themselves baffled by her complaints of numbness, memory lapses, and a deepening sense of isolation. They offered cures drawn from the humoral theories of antiquity, bloodletting, purgatives, and herbal poultices. But none could reverse the damage wrought by decades of lead and mercury exposure. Yet even as her body betrayed her, Elizabeth's resolve never wavered. She continued to govern her realm with the same steely determination, resolving matters of state, receiving foreign ambassadors, and overseeing the affairs of church and court. To her court and her people, she remained the indomitable Virgin Queen, her alabaster face a symbol of stability and grace. Behind the scenes, however, the toll of her beauty rituals weighed heavily upon her spirit. Had Elizabeth paused to question the cost of her perfection, she might have spared herself some agony. But in those times, the pursuit of the ideal was worth any sacrifice. The Queen's legacy, immortalized in portrait and verse, would outlive her mortal frame, but it would also echo as a cautionary tale. For beneath the veneer of alabaster lay a woman's body slowly succumbing to the very artifice she had wielded as a shield and a crown. And so, with each layer of lead and mercury she applied, Elizabeth unwittingly inched closer to the end of her own story, one that would ultimately reveal the devastating price of beauty in an age when science had yet to unveil its darkest secrets. Elizabeth I is one of the few queens in English history, and she was fully aware of the weight that distinction carried. She knew that every gaze in the realm was fixed upon her, and that any scar upon her face would mark her as an outcast in their eyes. In the year 1586, long after she had passed her 50th birthday, Elizabeth spoke candidly about this burden before Parliament. "We princes, I tell you, are set on stages in the sight and view of all the world duly observed. The eyes of many behold our actions. A spot is soon spied in our garments, a blemish noted quickly in our doings." This frank acknowledgement of her perpetual scrutiny was bold enough, but she went further. In an act that predated the modern notion of Instagram filters by centuries, she outright forbade any artist from painting her in an unflattering light. Painters at court were thus presented with an extraordinary challenge. They had to render the Queen looking youthful, vibrant, and alabaster, even as time and toxic cosmetics had ravaged her real skin. It was a delicate balance to portray Elizabeth as both recognizable and resplendent, without betraying a single crease, scar, or pore beneath that inch-thick mask of white. Their task was akin to a magician's trick. The visage before the world had to conceal decades of damage wrought by lead and mercury, all while convincing spectators that they were witnessing the sovereign's true likeness. One portrait in particular rose to the occasion and became the template for generations of court painters. The Darnley portrait, completed in 1575, presented Elizabeth in gentle three-quarter profile, her skin impossibly smooth, and her expression serene yet commanding. In this image, her eyes glimmered with a quiet authority, and the soft curve of her lips suggested both grace and resolve. For decades afterward, artists would turn back to this composition, copying its contours, lighting, and proportions as faithfully as they could. Thus, the Darnley likeness evolved into a kind of visual shorthand for Elizabeth's ideal self, an image divorced from her actual complexion, which in private reflected years of corrosive beauty regimens. Throughout her life, Elizabeth waged a relentless war against the ravages of time. She recognized that age threatened not only her beauty, but also the very efficacy of her rule. The elaborate gowns, the glittering jewelry, the intricate ruffs all served as distractions from the underlying reality of flesh grown thin and fragile. Yet even these grand distractions required supplementation. One of the Queen's more cunning strategies was the use of a wig. This was no mere accessory. It was a tactical device in her arsenal against aging. For many years, the true nature of her coiffure remained shrouded in courtly etiquette. Few dared to speak of the rumour that her own hair had thinned to a mere ring around her ears. That secrecy endured until the year 1599, when Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, inadvertently shattered the illusion. He recounted his shock upon beholding the monarch's almost bald pate, crowned only by a slender hoop of hair circling her temples. The revelation caused ripples of astonishment at court, for until then, the wig had served its purpose flawlessly. In public, Elizabeth presented an unbroken image of majesty. Her hair, thick and auburn, framed her face with the same regality that her makeup supplied. But behind closed doors, the wig was lifted, and the stark truth of mortality lay bare. Even after the Earl's disclosure, Elizabeth pressed on with her ritual. Each morning, amid the hush of her private apartments, her ladies would adjust the cap that held the wig in place. Beneath that cap, her scalp bore the marks of a lifetime spent under chemical assault. Thin patches, irritated follicles, and faintly pink areas where harsh mercurial scrubs had been applied. Despite this, the Queen never wavered. She believed that any sign of weakness, be it a thinning hairline or a faint crow's foot, could be seized upon by political rivals and foreign powers as evidence of frailty. Thus, she embraced every tool available to her, no matter how unnatural or cruel. The Darnley portrait, with its flawless hair and unblemished face, became the standard-bearer for her public image. In grand state portraits, in medals struck in her likeness, and in engravings distributed to foreign courts, Elizabeth appeared as an ageless sovereign, untouched by time's inexorable march. Even when pneumonia or other illnesses laid her low, the official images never faltered. They perpetuated the myth that Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, transcended the human condition. In private letters, however, her confidants sometimes hinted at her private struggles. "Your Majesty's skin grows weary beneath the weight of beauty," one attendant wrote. Yet the world must never see that fatigue. It was a perilous division between appearance and reality. The more Elizabeth insisted on her perfect visage, the deeper her reliance on toxic disguises. Her skin, unnaturally smooth on canvas, grew ever more fragile beneath the layers of lead and the weight of the wig. Yet her resolve remained unbroken. Every audience granted, every speech delivered, and every treaty signed bore the imprimatur of that carefully constructed image of power, an image that would outlast her sovereign life by centuries. Thus, in the twilight of her reign, Elizabeth stood as both monarch and masterpiece, her likeness preserved by artists who laboured to erase the marks of time. The irony was that in her quest to vanquish age and scar through artifice, she unleashed forces that would ultimately hasten her decline. Her relentless fight against mortality was etched in every painted portrait, in every gilded frame, and in every whispered compliment about her eternal youth. And yet, behind those painted eyes and beneath that sculpted hair, lay a woman all too human, bearing the scars of her own pursuit of perfection. This chapter in Elizabeth's story reveals the extraordinary lengths to which she went to maintain her image. It shows a sovereign who understood that her strength derived as much from her appearance as from her policies and her armies. As we continue, we will see how these measures so successful in preserving her myth also contributed to the unravelling of her physical health, guiding her ever closer to the final act of her life's drama. In her final months, Queen Elizabeth I refused to allow physicians to examine her. According to a courtier's account, the Queen had sunk into a profound melancholy, her spirit weighed down by unspoken burdens. Yet Elizabeth remained resolute in her decision not to rest. She firmly believed that, if she were to lie down, she would never rise again. Thus, she stood for no fewer than 15 hours each day, while her ladies-in-waiting arranged cushions around her in readiness should she collapse. All her life, Elizabeth had prided herself on standing firm both as ruler and as person, and in those twilight hours, she would not permit herself the simple luxury of reclining. It was on the 24th day of March in the year 1603 that Elizabeth drew her final breath. Contemporary observers speculated that she succumbed to cancer or pneumonia, ailments common in that era. Yet there was little doubt among those who knew her history of cosmetics that her decades-long habit of applying lead-based ceruse and mercury-laden pigments at ever greater intensities had exacted a grievous toll on her health. After a lifetime steeped in these toxic substances, the Queen's body was thoroughly saturated with poisons. The cumulative effect of chronic lead and mercury exposure left her weakened, vulnerable to disease, and struggling under the weight of her own indefatigable resolve. In the aftermath of her passing, one of her ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Southwell, claimed that the Queen's body had actually burst within her coffin during her funeral rites. Southwell attributed this phenomenon to the excessive build-up of noxious vapours escaping from the decomposing corpse. Though many scholars dismiss Southwell's tale as a piece of Jesuit propaganda, an attempt to sensationalize Elizabeth's death, it remains true that exploding casket syndrome is not a mere myth. Even in modern times, sealed coffins can trap gases and fluids generated by decay, turning the enclosed space into a makeshift pressure cooker. Left unchecked, internal pressure builds until the structural integrity of the coffin fails catastrophically. This grim occurrence, though shocking, underscores the tragic irony of Elizabeth's life and death. She had striven for an image of flawless permanence, applying inch-thick layers of corrosive makeup to mask the ravages of time and illness. In the end, the very efforts she undertook to preserve her vitality and sovereignty may have contributed to a violent, final rupture. The coffin, sealed meticulously to protect her dignity even in death, became a vessel for the lethal byproducts of a body saturated with lead and mercury. A body that had refused to rest, even as its cells cried out for respite. To consider the scene in sombre detail, the great chamber of Westminster Abbey, draped in mourning cloth, filled with mourners clad in black velvet and sumptuous silks, the bier stood at the centre, the Queen's alabaster face visible through a glass panel, appearing serene and untouched by the ailments that had stalked her. Yet within that glass chamber, unseen, the air had thickened with decay. Mercurial compounds, once trusted as beauty secrets, and lead particulates, once lauded as symbols of elegance, now mingled in noxious clouds. The coffin's seal, designed to preserve her form, instead trapped the lethal effluence until, according to Southwell, there was a sudden, ruinous expulsion, a violent breach that echoed the cruelty of the beauty regimen Elizabeth had endured. Of course, we lack definitive proof that the coffin truly exploded, and some historians argue that any such sound could have been a settling of the wooden frame or the release of cloth wrappings under strain. Yet the enduring legend of Elizabeth's exploding coffin reflects a deeper truth about her reign and her life, that the measures she took to guard against vulnerability ultimately invited a form of destruction beyond her control. Her steadfast refusal to rest, her unwavering demand for perpetually youthful beauty, and her regulation of every public image all pointed toward a monarch determined to transcend the frailties of the flesh. And yet, in death as in life, she was governed by the same merciless forces, time, decay, and the hidden poisons that had thrived within her. What then can we glean from the final act of Elizabeth's story? Perhaps it is a cautionary note about the perils of denying the body its natural cycles. She had believed that standing of spirit, of posture, of will, would carry her beyond mortal limits. Instead, that refusal to rest, to show weakness, became intertwined with her ultimate vulnerability. The coffin, once a symbol of statecraft and ceremony, transformed into a chamber of doom, reminding onlookers that no amount of artifice could forestall the inevitable end. Even as her subjects grieved and foreign embassies dispatched condolence envoys, the tale of the Queen's posthumous rupture circulated through taverns and courts alike. Poets penned elegies that spoke of her as a star plucked prematurely from the firmament. Painters created memorial portraits that, true to her edict, showed no flaw, yet the legend of her exploding coffin lingered at the margins, a macabre footnote to her dazzling reign. And so, as we reflect on Elizabeth's final hours, we see a sovereign who fought bravely against the erosion of her own flesh, only to find that resistance carried its own price. Her story compels us to look beyond the veneer of power and beauty, to consider the hidden burdens that accompany absolute authority. It reminds us that, in the end, a life lived in defiance of natural vulnerability is bound to encounter reckoning, and that the most spectacular departures often bear the sharpest edges of irony. One more terrible twist in Elizabeth's final chapter is that, while she undoubtedly suffered the ravages of lead and mercury poisoning, she may actually have died from blood poisoning. Just 1 week before her death in the year 1603, Elizabeth's physicians proposed a daring procedure. For 45 years since her coronation, the Queen had worn her coronation ring without ever removing it. Over those decades, the ring had slowly cut into the already poisoned flesh of her finger, embedding itself into swollen tissue. The court doctors warned her that the ring must be surgically removed, that to leave it in place was to risk a life-threatening infection. And yet, a mere 7 days after their entreaties, Elizabeth breathed her last and, depending on whom you ask, her sealed coffin burst open in a final, grotesque release of the very toxins she had absorbed over a lifetime. Evidence of human use of lead in cosmetics dates back at least to the 5th century before Christ. Women in the Roman Empire powdered their faces with white lead dust, believing it conferred elegance and status. By the 16th century, this concoction had evolved into what was known as Venetian ceruse, or the spirit of Saturn, the Queen's favourite cosmetic. Tragically for Elizabeth and all ceruse devotees throughout history, Lead did not earn its classification as a poison until the year 1634, less than 40 years after her demise. In that span, countless lives were claimed by hair loss and skin damage, ailments well known even in Elizabeth's time, yet the true culprit remained unacknowledged. It took centuries for humanity to reckon with the fact that we were, in essence, killing ourselves in the pursuit of beauty. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth had been keenly aware of how any physical weakness might undermine her authority. Her advisors often remarked that she feared being perceived as frail more than being regarded as merciless. And so, she persisted in her toxic beauty regimen, layering on lead paste and mercury dyes, believing that perfection of appearance would ensure perfection of power. But power, as it turned out, did not protect her from the insidious march of poison through her veins. The surgical removal of the coronation ring was too drastic a measure for a queen who prided herself on appearances. To Elizabeth, that ring was more than a symbol of sovereignty. It was a talisman, unbroken by design, signifying her unending rule. The very notion of cutting it from her finger must have seemed akin to severing her claim to the throne. Moreover, the operation itself posed a dire threat to a body already burdened by toxins. Anesthesia as we know it did not exist, and any incision risked allowing even more poison to enter her bloodstream. She refused to consider it, and in that refusal lay the seed of her undoing. By the end of her life, Elizabeth's health was a fragile tapestry of ailments. Her hair had thinned under the weight of harsh mercurial scrubs. Her skin was fragile, etched with microscopic wounds from repeated corrosion. Her mind swayed between lucidity and melancholic wandering. Yet never once did she lay herself upon a bed of rest. To do so, she claimed, would be to give in to death's summons, and she was not yet ready to yield. And so she lingered on her body a ledger of toxins, her spirit unbowed. When Elizabeth finally died, the news rippled through kingdoms and courts. Her passing marked the end of an era, the closing of a chapter in England's storied history. Painters queued to capture her likeness one final time. Poets composed elegies celebrating her indomitable will. And yet, amid the grandeur of state mourning, whispers persisted of a corpse that could not remain contained, of a coffin that shattered from within. Whether truth or legend, the tale of Elizabeth's exploding coffin resonated with the public imagination, a fitting denouement to a life spent hiding decay beneath layers of artifice. It is a sobering reflection that the very substances intended to preserve Elizabeth's visage may have hastened her demise. Lead and mercury, embraced as tools of beauty, transformed over time into agents of destruction ingested not through the mouth but through the skin, seeping silently into vital organs. The Queen's body, once a beacon of youthful authority, became a toxic repository, its cells corrupted by the worship of perfect appearance. And yet, if Elizabeth's story seems like a cautionary tale from a distant past, the underlying lesson remains disturbingly relevant. Even now, in our age of advanced pharmaceuticals and stringent safety testing, the spectre of beauty-induced harm persists. We pierce and polish, inject and enhance, in relentless pursuit of an ideal that shifts with every trend. We submit to painful procedures, swallow questionable compounds, and subject ourselves to experimental regimens, all to chase a fleeting vision of perfection. The mechanisms have evolved, but the impulse remains the same. Like Elizabeth, we construct facades to deflect our vulnerabilities. We apply filters, conceal our flaws, and curate our public images as carefully as any Tudor painter. And, like her, we risk overlooking the hidden costs of our pursuits. The Queen's reign reminds us that the quest for beauty, when divorced from wisdom, can become a cruel master. It exacts a toll not only on the body but on the soul, as we trade authenticity for artifice and health for illusion. In the end, Elizabeth's legacy is twofold. She stands as an exemplar of resilience and leadership, a sovereign who guided her nation with intellect and strength. Simultaneously, her life underscores the peril of allowing external standards to dictate our worth. The lead-white mask and mercury-red lips that defined her reign also defined the poison that led her body to its final reckoning. As night deepens and we contemplate Elizabeth's story, a single thought lingers. Beauty, in its truest form, emerges not from layers of toxic paste, but from the acceptance of our own imperfections. And while the allure of transformation may beckon, we must remember that every alteration carries a price. a price that, in the worst of cases, may be paid with our very lives. The pockmarks left by smallpox were far more than a mere aesthetic inconvenience. They were a profound psychological torment for Elizabeth. Each tiny crater on her cheeks and forehead spoke of the fragility of both power and beauty. Elizabeth understood that, in the unforgiving world of court politics, appearance was a potent weapon and that any flaw could be wielded against her. She had watched other Tudor women be dissected by gossip and ruined over trifling imperfections, and she was determined never to become one of them. The fear of judgment, of being branded an outcast, drove her to embrace those toxic cosmetics as a protective barrier. Elizabeth's battle against the ravages of time unfolded in hushed ceremonies and private rituals, but it was fierce and unrelenting. She did not merely contend with the indentations of her youthful affliction, she also faced the natural aging process itself, the inexorable drift of skin into sagging folds and delicate wrinkles. To preserve her youthful facade, Elizabeth imposed strict controls on her public image. She banned any artist from painting an unflattering portrait of her, an audacious decree that functioned as a form of propaganda, ensuring that every depiction supported her illusion of ageless authority. Court painters, faced with this edict, were compelled to exercise extraordinary ingenuity, making the Queen appear luminous, smooth, and fresh-faced, even as she moved deeper into her autumn years. Out of this climate of image control emerged the celebrated portraits known as the Mask of Youth. These paintings depicted a monarch with flawless skin, unblemished and vibrant, embodying an eternal spring. The Darnley portrait, completed in the year 1575, became the prototype for these reproductions. In it, Elizabeth's face was rendered with a translucent quality, her eyes bright with intelligence, and her countenance serene. For decades thereafter, artists across England and beyond would borrow from the Darnley likeness its lighting, its soft gradations of tone, the gentle play of shadow along the jawline. Each new portrait echoed the same message, that here stood a sovereign, untouched by age, untouched by frailty. Yet for all their beauty, these images were also instruments of political power. They perpetuated the illusion that the Queen was immutable, a figure of unwavering strength whose physical perfection mirrored her unassailable right to rule. They helped to maintain loyalty among her subjects, to impress foreign diplomats, and to silence critics who might have exploited signs of decline. In this way, art became a subtle but potent extension of her sovereignty, an artifice as vital to her reign as any treaty or battlefield victory. Behind the scenes, however, the Queen's reliance on these painted masks took a toll on her already fragile spirit. She would sit for hours, draped in velvet, in a state of quiet resignation, knowing that the slightest misstep by a brush or pigment could betray her carefully guarded secret. Her mind, ever vigilant, would measure the painter's strokes with the same scrutiny she applied to state documents and military reports. Each session was a reminder that her power depended not only on counsel and charisma, but on the uninterrupted illusion of youth. As the years wore on, Elizabeth's inner turmoil deepened. On occasion, she confided in her closest attendants, lamenting that the very tools she used to shield herself from vulnerability were also creating a prison of perfection. She feared that without the mask of youth, her authority might crumble, and so she remained trapped in a cycle of application and erasure, pleading for the painter's brushstrokes, even as she mourned the loss of authenticity. The portraits, treasured by her court, travelled far and wide, becoming the standard by which other royal likenesses were judged. Yet when private letters described Elizabeth's demeanour during these sittings, they spoke of a woman grown weary, her spirit punctuated by brief flashes of melancholy. One attendant noted that Elizabeth's gaze would sometimes drift, as though she saw not the painted image but the fading reality beneath. Still, she would rally, insisting that every portrait must convey vitality and grace. In public ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, parliamentary openings, grand banquets, these painted masks served their purpose. Elizabeth's subjects saw only the polished surface, a queen whose features glowed like polished ivory, whose cheeks registered no furrows of age. The minds of those gathered were steered toward her enduring strength, and the whispers about the scars or the weariness of her eyes were quieted, if not fully silenced, by the spectacle of her perfection. Yet the knowledge of that perfection's artifice lurked in the shadows of court life. Detractors whispered that Elizabeth's beauty was a hollow shell, propped up by dangerous applications of lead and mercury. Rumours spread that the Queen's days were numbered, that she was sustained less by her own vigour than by the lethal poisons hidden in her cosmetics. Such talk, never fully suppressed, reflected the anxiety that underpinned her reign, the fear that a sovereign who refused to show weakness might in the end be undone by the very measures she took to hide it. It is a testament to Elizabeth's will that she maintained her throne for so long that her portrait remained the emblem of her sovereignty even as signs of her struggle were erased from sight. She understood better than most that power could be wielded through beauty, that the brush could be as mighty as the sword, and yet, in the quiet corners of her chambers, she wrestled with the price of that power, a price paid in the corrosion of her flesh, the burden on her spirit, and the relentless tension between image and reality. The mask of youth portraits stand today as relics of an era when monarchs commanded not only armies but also the very perceptions of their people. They remind us of a ruler who used every tool at her disposal to project authority, including the tools of deception, and they echo the profound insecurity that lay at the heart of her confidence. For all their exquisite beauty, these painted faces conceal a deeper truth, that in the quest to defeat time and disease, Elizabeth waged a solitary battle, one fought with pigments and canvas, each brushstroke a plea for immortality. As we leave this chapter of her story, the image of those flawless portraits lingers a haunting testament to the lengths a monarch would go to protect her reign, and to the inner turmoil that such lengths can provoke. In the silence that follows, we are left to wonder whether the perfect face was worth the price paid, and whether any mask, no matter how artfully painted, can truly shield us from the passage of years. Elizabeth's battle against the ravages of time did not end with her skin. As years passed, the Queen's famed red tresses began to yield to a soft grey, a signal that even her vibrant appearance could not escape nature's slow erosion. To conceal this unwelcome sign of age, Elizabeth turned to the practice of wearing a wig, an artful disguise crafted to restore the illusion of youth. For many years this act remained a tacit understanding among those closest to her. It was a secret unspoken, but universally acknowledged in the hushed corridors of court. Officially, however, the Queen never admitted to its use, preserving the veneer of natural beauty that defined her public persona. All that changed in the year 1599. One of Elizabeth's most favoured courtiers, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, revealed the truth in a moment of heated dispute. The details vary in the retelling, but the essence remains the same. Essex, caught up in passionate argument, confessed that he had seen the Queen's bare scalp nearly bald, save for a slim band of hair circling her temples. He described the shock that seized him. The wig he had long admired was merely a clever cap, masking the reality of her thinning locks. News of his disclosure spread through the palace like a slow-moving storm, leaving in its wake a shiver of uncertainty. For Elizabeth, the revelation struck at the heart of her authority. Her hair, dyed to a fiery copper in her youth, and celebrated in countless poems and portraits, had become inseparable from her identity. Subjects hailed her flowing locks as a sign of fertility, vigour, and divine favour. Yet Essex's words laid bare the artifice behind that image. No longer could she rely on the illusion of unbroken vitality. The wig, once a silent ally, was exposed as a fragile facade. The political implications were profound. In the delicate dance of Tudor power, perception carried tremendous weight. To appear anything less than perfect was to invite scrutiny, to offer a chink in the armour of monarchy. Rivals at home and abroad seized upon the news, whispering that the Queen's reign was waning along with her hairline. Foreign ambassadors, once dazzled by her radiant presence, now studied her countenance for further signs of decline. Every rumour regarding the wig chipped away at the unassailable image she had so carefully constructed. Elizabeth's reaction was one of fierce indignation. She understood that the Earl's disclosure was more than a personal betrayal. It was an assault on her very essence. In the aftermath, she is said to have confronted Essex in private, her voice cold with reproach. The wig, she declared, was her choice, a necessary measure in the unrelenting battle against age. To criticise it was to disrespect her sovereignty. Although Essex was eventually forgiven, the breach in trust could not be fully mended. Court life, once a realm of silent reverence, grew tense with hushed conversations and surreptitious glances. Ladies-in-waiting speculated about the nature of Elizabeth's hair underneath the elaborate hairstyles she wore for state occasions. Some insisted that the wig had been refined and perfected to the point of indistinguishability, while others whispered of homemade remedies the Queen tried in secret to restore her natural colour. The air was thick with questions that no subject dared ask aloud. Meanwhile, Elizabeth pressed on with her usual resolve. She commissioned new wigs more ornate, more voluminous, hoping that fresh disguises would bury the scandal of Essex's revelation. Skilled wigmakers laboured in back chambers, fashioning pieces from human hair, wool, and fine horsehair, dyeing and curling each strand to match the vivid hue of the original. When these new wigs were placed upon her head, Elizabeth's confidence seemed restored. In public gatherings, she appeared as radiant as ever, her hair cascading in rich waves, her posture regal and composed. Yet beneath the surface, the Queen's secret gnawed at her. She recognized that her image, once a source of power, had become a liability. In private letters, she occasionally alluded to the anxiety that accompanied her morning routine. An attender recorded that Elizabeth would pause before dressing, touching the edges of her wig with a flicker of doubt, as though questioning whether the mask could hold one more day. It was a subtle admission that, despite her outward composure, she felt the vulnerability of her deception. That vulnerability found its way into political discourse. Parliamentary debates, previously focused on matters of statecraft and finance, now included offhand remarks about Elizabeth's age and capacity to govern. Some MPs employed coded language, speaking of waning flames and fading glory, metaphors for both a dying ember and a head of greying hair. Foreign envoys noted the shift in atmosphere, reporting back to their sovereigns that the English Queen, once full of verve, now cultivated an image that required ever greater artifice. Still, Elizabeth remained undeterred. She had weathered smallpox, court intrigues, and conspiracies against her life. A wig revealed was a trifling challenge in comparison. She doubled down on her use of cosmetics and accessories, reinforcing the carefully curated aesthetic that defined her reign. Sleeves were slashed to reveal fine white linen, collars stiffened to frame her face, and gowns embroidered with patterns that drew the eye toward her mask-like visage. Each element of her wardrobe served to distract from any hint of the truth beneath. Over time, the shock of Essex's revelation faded into the background noise of court life, absorbed by fresh intrigues and new political maneuvers. Elizabeth's use of wigs became an accepted, if unspoken, part of her persona. Artists resumed painting her with wigs intact, and poets returned to praising the beauty of her golden locks. Yet the memory of that betrayal lingered, a reminder that the trappings of power are as fragile as the human form they adorn. Ultimately, the incident underscores Elizabeth's remarkable resilience. She transformed a personal outrage into a catalyst for deeper image control, reinforcing her dominion over both her appearance and her realm. In choosing to wear a wig rather than accept the telltale signs of age, she asserted that a monarch's worth transcended natural decline. And although Essex's disclosure momentarily weakened her image, her subsequent actions reaffirmed her mastery over perception itself. Thus, the story of Elizabeth's wig is more than a curious footnote. It is a testament to her enduring will. In fabricating an illusion of youth, she crafted a symbol of continuity and strength that outlasted any physical transformation. Beneath the sheen of false hair lay a sovereign unbowed, one who, despite the exposure of her secret, wielded that exposure as another tool in the ceaseless struggle for power and legacy. In this way, the wig became both shield and scepter, a reminder that in Elizabeth's world, appearances were not mere decoration but the very foundation of authority. In her final months, Queen Elizabeth I's health faltered severely. Physicians whispered among themselves in hushed tones, their brows creasing with concern, while courtiers stole glances at her wan countenance, noting pallor beneath the ceruse and a tremor in her poised steps. Yet Elizabeth steadfastly refused any medical intervention. She sank into a profound melancholy, a quiet gloom that settled like a heavy fog over her spirit. Still, she would not permit herself the simple act of rest. In her mind, to lie down was to surrender to death's call, a superstition born of unyielding self-control that would not countenance weakness. She believed, with unwavering conviction, that if she ever reclined even briefly, she would never again rise to stand at her throne. And so Elizabeth remained upright. Each day, She stood without respite for 15 hours on end, her posture as rigid as the crown she bore. Around her, ladies-in-waiting arranged cushions in a protective ring, soft, pale bolsters ready to catch her should she falter. This tableau, played out in the dim corridors of the royal apartments, was at once a testament to her extraordinary fortitude and a portrait of her deepest fear. She had spent a lifetime proving she could stand firm through intrigues, rebellions, and the relentless demands of statecraft. Now, in her waning days, she resolved to stand even in death, to die, as she had lived erect, austere, the embodiment of sovereign authority. The episode was both awe-inspiring and tragic. In the hush of candlelight, the Queen's still figure, draped in silken robes, cast a long shadow upon the tapestry-lined walls. Her breath came in quiet, measured gasps, each exhalation a gentle reminder of the human frailty she refused to acknowledge. Although her attendants offered poultices and whispered entreaties to rest, Elizabeth dismissed them. She feared that horizontal repose would be an admission of defeat, an opening for her enemies to claim she was too infirm to rule. Thus she clung to her stance, a living monument to unbreakable resolve. This decision to confront mortality standing was more than an act of stubborn pride. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent mastering every detail of her public image. From the earliest days of her reign, she had fashioned herself into an icon of invincibility. Her unblemished portraits, her satin gowns, her elaborately painted face, all served to project an aura of eternal youth and unshakable strength. Yet now, those same tools of self-creation offered no solace against the ravages of time. The Queen stood alone in her private chambers. No crown, but the steadfast determination on her brow. No sceptre, but the staff of her own unyielding will. Her courtiers watched in silent fear as the hours passed. Each tick of the clock echoed through the vaulted ceiling, a metronome marking the passage of life toward its inevitable end. Some dared to pray that she might relent, to sink into a bed and allow her body the rest it so desperately needed. Others feared that any such act would hasten her death, confirming the Queen's own superstition. And so, they remained silent, offering only gentle drink and soft words. They assembled a cushion barricade around her pale circles on polished floorboards that stood in stark contrast to her lithe, determined figure. Elizabeth's decision to stand, come what may, was not a peaceful curtain call but a final act of defiance. She would not yield to infirmity. Her energy, though waning, found one last reservoir in the belief that the throne must not be relinquished, not even in death. She had always commanded the stage of history, and now she staged her final performance upright, regal to the last breath. It was a confrontation with fate as stark as any battlefield, the sovereign's last stand against the encroaching darkness. When at last the Queen yielded to mortality, it was with the dignity she had so jealously guarded. On the 24th of March, 1603, she ceased to breathe while standing among her ladies-in-waiting. No bed had been disturbed, no pillows pressed to her head. Only the soft sigh of her passing broke the profound silence. Those who witnessed the moment spoke of a hush that fell over the room, as though the very air paid homage to her final wish. Then, gently, her cushions caught her collapse, transforming her fall not into a surrender, but into a final, graceful bow. In that act, Elizabeth's life and reign reached their poignant conclusion. She had refused the respite of rest, embraced the agony of standing, and in doing so carved from her own mortality a testament to indomitable spirit. Her coffin would later bear the marks of her struggle legend, whispers of an explosive finale of noxious vapours. But in life, she stood tallest at her end, a monarch who would not kneel even before the grave. And as her court mourned and her people wept, the image of that standing figure remained, a sombre reminder that the greatest courage may lie in refusing to yield, to stand unwavering until the final breath. On the 24th day of March in the year 1603, Queen Elizabeth I drew her final breath. The annals of history have long recorded that her passing was attributed to cancer or pneumonia, ailments all too common in her day. Yet scholars now believe that her decades-long use of lead-based ceruse and mercury-infused cosmetics must have exacted a grievous toll on her constitution. After a lifetime of heavy metal exposure, Elizabeth's body had become deeply saturated with toxins. Though official records remain silent on this matter, one of her ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Southwell, offered a shocking account. that the Queen's body burst within her coffin during the funeral proceedings. Southwell claimed that the explosion resulted from a build-up of noxious vapours trapped in the sealed coffin. While many historians dismiss her testimony as Jesuit propaganda, part of a faction's bid to sensationalize Elizabeth's demise, the phenomenon known as exploding casket syndrome is not without precedent. Throughout history and even into the modern era, tightly sealed coffins have acted like pressure cookers, trapping gases and fluids produced by decomposition until the internal pressure becomes too great and ruptures the wood and metal around it. Whether or not Elizabeth's coffin truly exploded, the tale itself has contributed to the shroud of mystery and tragedy that envelops her final moments. It stands as a horrifying finale, a grim testament to the price paid for vanity and the denial of life's natural course. In those days, embalming practices were rudimentary at best. A corpse might be dressed in fine linens, anointed with oils and resins to mask the early stages of decay, then placed in a sturdy coffin lined with lead or pitch for preservation. But when the Queen's body, saturated with centuries' worth of lead and mercury, was sealed away, her own makeup became a latent threat. The very substances meant to preserve her beauty now fed the decomposition process, accelerating the production of odorous gases. As heat and moisture combined within the wood and metal enclosure, pressure mounted relentlessly. According to Southwell's account, there was a sudden, violent release, an explosive lament that echoed through the hall and left mourners aghast. Whether this dramatic event was fact or fiction, it captures the essence of Elizabeth's life and reign, the interplay of spectacle and substance, image and reality. She had spent her years masking the ravages of time with layers of lead and mercury, refusing to allow any sign of decay to mar her public persona. Yet in death, that same determination to preserve herself led to a final, uncontrollable rupture. The sealed coffin, meant to safeguard her dignity, became the site of a grotesque unveiling, a stark reminder that artifice can never fully overcome the truths of the flesh. The story of the exploding coffin spread quickly, its retelling adding to the air of cautionary legend surrounding the Queen. Some claimed that an audible crack had sounded as mourners gathered for the final rites, followed by a rush of putrid air that billowed from the coffin like a funeral plume. Others insisted that the sound was more akin to a sudden collapse of metal hinges, a less sensational explanation, but one that did little to quell public fascination. Poets and pamphleteers seized upon the tale, weaving it into elegies that spoke of Elizabeth's beauty, scorning even the grave, and of her body, seething with the poisons of her own making. These verses circulated in broadsheets and travelled abroad, ensuring that the Queen's death remained a subject of morbid curiosity long after her earthly reign had ended. In the hush of Westminster Abbey, as the embers of the funeral candles guttered low, courtiers whispered of the irony that a sovereign so determined to outlast mortality should perish in such a sensational manner. The juxtaposition of Elizabeth's carefully crafted image, her alabaster face, her regal coiffure, her gilt-edged garments with the violent finality of her demise, created a dissonance that haunted those who had served her. It was as though the Queen, in her final act, had orchestrated a last performance, one that underscored the fragility of all human pretensions. For modern readers, the notion of an exploding coffin may stretch credulity, yet it underscores a deeper truth about Elizabeth's pursuit of perfection. From her earliest days as a monarch, she had embraced cosmetics as tools of statecraft, layering lead and mercury in a bid to maintain her image of divine authority. Her beauty regimen was no mere vanity. It was an extension of her sovereignty, a means to command reverence and loyalty. And just as no seat of power is immune to the forces of rebellion and intrigue, so too was her body vulnerable to the poisons she had chosen to embrace. Elizabeth's story invites reflection on the costs of defying nature and denying vulnerability. She lived her life in the glare of public scrutiny, her every feature subjected to the lens of court painters and the pen of chroniclers. In response, she shrouded herself in artifice, constructing a persona that could stand firm against the sands of time. Yet in the end, the very measures she employed to conceal decay became instruments of her downfall. The explosion, or the legend of it, remains a stark reminder that physical beauty, when pursued at the expense of health and truth, can yield a tragic denouement. As we contemplate the Queen's final chapter, the image of her coffin rupturing from within becomes a powerful emblem. It suggests that the pressures of concealed flaws, of unacknowledged illnesses and hidden vulnerabilities can build until they shatter the facades we erect. Elizabeth's life, marked by resilience and strategic acumen, was also marked by the relentless denial of her own humanity. In death, the echoes of that denial reverberated through the abbey, a lament for the perils of perfection. Thus, whether the account of Elizabeth's exploding coffin is taken as literal fact or as a metaphor for the collapse of an artifice, it endures as part of her legacy. It reminds us that the sovereign who once stood unbowed before armies and parliaments could not ultimately conquer the very body she commanded. And it stands as a cautionary tale, that in the quest for eternal beauty and unassailable image, we may inadvertently trap ourselves within a pressure cooker of our own making, until the very coffins we build become the agents of our undoing. Another hypothesis surrounding the death of Elizabeth I involves a familiar emblem of her authority, her coronation ring. For 45 years, from the moment she ascended the throne, the Queen wore that ring without ever removing it. Over time, its metal band gradually began to cut into her already poisoned flesh, creating an open wound on the finger that had borne it so loyally. Elizabeth's physicians observed the lesion with growing alarm. They warned her that the ring must be surgically removed, lest the raw cut become a portal for infection. Yet the Queen, ever resolute, refused their entreaties. She believed that to remove the ring would be to loosen her grip on the very symbol of her sovereignty. 1 week after that fateful council, she drew her final breath. Historians now suggest that this unhealed wound, compounded by the years of lead and mercury poisoning that had eroded her immune defenses, may well have given rise to septicemia, blood poisoning. As the toxins circulated through her body, every organ grew more vulnerable to the ravages of infection. The ring, once a shining emblem of power, had become a cruel irony. It sustained her authority in life, and perhaps hastened her demise through an unrelenting infection. To imagine Elizabeth in those final days is to picture a monarch who could not separate herself from the artifacts of her reign. The coronation ring was not merely jewelry. It was a covenant with her people, a tangible affirmation of her divine right to rule. Removing it, she feared, might signal a fracture in her legitimacy, so she endured the wound, disregarding the whispered warnings of her physicians. If she had acceded even for a moment, she might have spared herself the silent progress of gangrene and systemic infection. Instead, she clung to the ring as steadfastly as she had clung to her crown. The tragedy of this scenario lies in its poetic symmetry. Elizabeth devoted her life to maintaining an image of unassailable authority, investing her power in objects that represented her rule rings, scepters, and robes of state. Each item bolstered her persona, enabling her to stand firm in council chambers and public audiences. But those same objects became extensions of her body, inseparable from her sense of self. They were the very trappings that defined her reign, and in the end, they also became instruments of her undoing. What makes this hypothesis especially poignant is that it illustrates a deeper truth about the costs of reign. The monarch who once declared that she would have but one mistress and no wife to preserve her independence ended up trapped by the symbols of that independence. Her coronation ring, enchanted with personal and political significance, embodied both her triumph and her vulnerability. It reminds us that power, when embodied in physical tokens, can bind a ruler as tightly as any chain. We might envision Elizabeth in her final hours, surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting, the wound on her finger wrapped in linen, a faint light of agony flickering in her once bold eyes. She listens as doctors murmur of cauterization and surgery, their faces lined with professional dread. Yet she stands firm, her mind made up. She will not yield the ring, nor will she yield to the bed. If her body must fail, it will do so on her own terms, still standing, still adorned with the symbols that defined her. And so it was that the Queen's life and identity remained forever intertwined with her coronation ring. When she died on that March day, 1603, she did so without having relinquished the very object that marked her sovereignty. The wound's infection spread unchecked, overtaking her body from the site of the cut to the farthest reaches of her veins. In the absence of modern antibiotics, there was no cure for the septicemia that arose. All the prestige in the realm could not stave off the bacterial onslaught unleashed by that small, unyielding band of precious metal. As the news of her passing spread through London and beyond, courtiers reflected on the ironies of her demise. The same ring that had linked her to the tradition of her Tudor ancestors had now tied her to a fatal outcome. Poets and chroniclers debated the moral of her end. Was it hubris to refuse the removal of a mere ring? Or was it a testament to the depth of her resolve, choosing death over the dissolution of her royal image? In the great tapestry of her life, this final thread was woven with a tragic elegance, a last stand of a monarch unwilling to loosen her grasp on power. This story serves as a stark reminder that even the loftiest symbols can become sources of ruin when they are allowed to define us so completely. Elizabeth's ring, like her painted visage and her silken garments, was a tool of governance, a means to project strength. But in the crucible of her final days, it also became a conduit for destruction. It shows us that the very instruments we rely upon to affirm our identity and authority can, if held too tightly, become instruments of our decline. Ultimately, Elizabeth's life and death are bound together by a single lesson: that power and physical embodiment are inseparable, and that the artifacts of authority carry consequences beyond their ceremonial value. Her coronation ring exemplified the dual nature of symbols. They can elevate us, yet they can also imprison us. And in the quiet chambers where Elizabeth made her last decisions, that single ring stood as both crown and curse, a poignant emblem of a reign that would forever be remembered for its grandeur, its cunning, and its tragic end. The story of Elizabeth's tragic death is not an isolated event. It is part of a disturbing trend in human history, one in which people willingly risked their lives in the pursuit of an impossible standard of beauty. Evidence of lead use in cosmetics dates back at least to the 5th century before Christ, when women of the Roman Empire powdered their faces with white lead dust, believing it conveyed elegance and status. By the 16th century, this concoction had evolved into what was called Venetian ceruse, or the spirit of Saturn, a prized favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. For Elizabeth and the countless devotees of ceruse who followed in her footsteps, the true danger of this practice remained hidden for far too long. Although it was known that lead could cause hair loss and skin damage even in ancient times, it was not officially classified as a poison until the year 1634, less than 40 years after Elizabeth's death. In the interim, people accepted these terrible side effects as the price of beauty, blinded by social pressures and a lack of scientific understanding. Women across Europe and eventually around the globe applied layer upon layer of toxic paste, sealing lead against their skin day after day, year after year, unaware that each application was slowly poisoning them from within. The allure of ceruse lay in its ability to create an otherworldly pallor, a smooth, unblemished complexion that seemed to glow by candlelight. In an age before photography and mass media, a flawless face conveyed power, wealth, and divine favour. It was a signal that one belonged to the upper echelons of society, that one's status was unassailable. Yet that same signal gradually became a death warrant for thousands of women who embraced the fad without understanding its dangers. The tragedy of lead cosmetics is a powerful reminder that ignorance and obsession can blur the line between personal adornment and self-destruction. Despite occasional warnings from physicians who observed patients suffering from lead poisoning, with brittle hair, eroded gums, and deteriorating mental health, the practice persisted. It was far easier to ignore scattered reports of illness than to confront the social forces demanding a pale visage. In Elizabeth's time, to reject ceruse was to risk social ostracism, to appear plain or ill-groomed. The desire to conform to an ideal, to project authority and allure, outweighed any fear of long-term harm. Queen Elizabeth herself, perhaps the most celebrated ceruse user in history, paid the ultimate price. She attained unparalleled power and intellect. Yet she could not resist the pressure to maintain a perfect appearance. Her life underscores a fundamental paradox, that those who reach the greatest heights of influence and insight can still fall prey to the simplest of obsessions. Even a monarch renowned for her wisdom became a victim of the misguided beauty standards of her era. The scope of this phenomenon extended beyond Elizabeth's court. Aristocratic women across the continent adopted Venetian ceruse, and as trade routes expanded, the trend spread to emerging cities and port towns. Midwives, familiar with the skin complaints of new mothers, might remark on the corrosive effects of ceruse, but their voices were too faint against the roar of fashion's demand. Painters and poets lauded the porcelain countenance, reinforcing the notion that any sacrifice was justified for an image so refined. Curiously, Once ceruse fell out of favor, after its toxic nature became widely recognized, it left little more than a cautionary tale in the collective memory. Over time, societies moved on to new beauty. Innovations, mercurial hair dyes, arsenic-based whitening, and, in more recent centuries, chemical peels and injectable treatments, all bearing their own risks. Yet the human impulse remains the same, to alter the body in pursuit of a cultural ideal, regardless of the cost. Elizabeth's story, then, stands as both a pinnacle and a warning. It is a reminder that the pursuit of perfection can blind even the brightest minds to the dangers at hand. That a sovereign who shaped the destiny of a nation could be felled by her own vanity is a sobering truth. Her death underscores that no amount of power or intellect can fully shield one from the pressures of society or the limits of one's physiology. In reflecting on Elizabeth's fate, we are reminded that beauty standards, though seemingly superficial, can exert profound influence over life choices and health outcomes. The silken gowns and polished portraits of the Tudor court concealed a grim reality, that beneath the sheen lay the slow, inexorable effects of lead poisoning. It took centuries for science to catch up with fashion, to elucidate the link between ceruse and disease. By then, countless women had suffered in silence, their lives cut short or their health compromised by a toxic mask. Today, as we navigate a new era of beauty technologies, laser treatments, dermal fillers, genetic profiling, it behooves us to remember the lessons of the past. Elizabeth's tragic end warns us not to conflate appearance with worth, not to surrender our well-being to fleeting trends. True empowerment arises when individuals choose authenticity over artifice, health over hollow ideals. When we honor our bodies and acknowledge their limits, we safeguard not only our lives but our sense of self. Though centuries have passed since Elizabeth's reign, the echoes of her story remain. The Venetian ceruse of her era may have faded into history, but its legacy endures in every cosmetic that promises more than nature can safely give. As we gaze upon the pale portraits of the Virgin Queen, let us see not only an icon of Renaissance power, but also a cautionary emblem, that the quest for unreachable beauty can lead us down a perilous path, where the allure of perfection becomes the architect of our undoing. The story of Elizabeth I is not merely a sorrowful chapter of history, it also offers a profound lesson for our contemporary lives. Like Elizabeth, many among us continue to chase unrealistic beauty standards. We readily embrace products and procedures, chemical peels, injectable fillers, extreme diets that may promise perfection but carry risks to our health. Vanity and societal pressure regarding appearance remain pressing concerns. We too are willing to endure pain and peril to resemble the idealized images flashing across our screens, a modern incarnation of the mask of youth that Elizabeth employed so relentlessly. Our age is marked by filters, retouched photographs, and curated personas. We scroll through social media feeds, comparing ourselves to flawless faces and sculpted bodies. We see influencers holding up potions and devices, each promising transformation, each inviting us to believe that beauty is something to be achieved at any cost. Yet beneath the veneer of perfection, there often lies a silent sacrifice, sleepless nights nursing bruises from injections, allergic reactions to experimental creams, and, at times, the lingering regret of irreversible procedures. In echo of Elizabeth's tragic end, we risk corrupting our health in the vain pursuit of an ever-shifting ideal. For centuries, the link between vanity and harm has gone unheeded. Venetian ceruse was but the earliest known example, and arsenic-based whitening creams followed. Today's hazards may come in different forms: radioactive eye masks, illicit slimming supplements, or unregulated cosmetic devices, but the impulse remains unchanged. We apply layer upon layer of enhancement, hoping to banish imperfections, yet risking injury to the body that supports our every move. Elizabeth's story reminds us that the price of beauty can be steep, measured not only in fleeting approval, but in long-term consequences. True beauty, however, is not defined by pallid skin or a wrinkle-free facade. Instead, it blossoms from confidence, wisdom, and the courage to embrace our imperfections. When we look beyond the surface, we find that character, laughter lines, and the stories written in our expressions convey far greater depth than any cosmetic mask could offer. Strength emerges in vulnerability, in acknowledging our flaws, learning from them, and forging an authentic self that does not rely on endless touch-ups or constant validation. We might pause then to consider what it means to value health over hollow ideals, to choose nourishment rather than deprivation, to practice self-care that honors our bodies without resorting to harmful shortcuts, to cultivate inner resilience through mindful living, balanced nutrition, and exercise that celebrates function as well as form, to share unfiltered images of ourselves, cracks and all, reinforcing the message that perfection is not a prerequisite for belonging or worth. In Elizabeth's time, she wore layers of lead and mercury to shield herself from scorn. Today, we may don digital filters or seek out advanced cosmetic treatments, but the underlying fear is similar: the dread of being judged, of feeling exposed when our facade falters. Elizabeth's relentless maintenance of her image ultimately consumed her health. By contrast, embracing authenticity can foster wellness. Genuine confidence shines through in the twinkle of the eye, the warmth of a smile, and the steadiness of a posture unburdened by pretense. Moreover, Elizabeth's life underscores the interplay between power, vanity, and truth. Even a monarch lauded for her intellect and leadership could be undermined by the pressure to meet beauty expectations. In modern contexts, leaders in business, politics, or the arts may likewise feel the pull of superficial norms, at times prioritizing image management over substantive values. We are reminded that genuine authority stems from integrity and expertise, not from the flawless presentation of an exterior. When we allow ourselves the space to grow physically, mentally, and emotionally, we become stronger and more relatable, forging connections grounded in shared humanity rather than in carefully controlled optics. The painful irony of Elizabeth's fate suggests that clinging too tightly to symbols of power or beauty can transform them into bonds that weigh us down. Her coronation ring, her crown, her powdered visage all represented her sovereignty, yet in the end, they contributed to her undoing. In our own lives, we may accumulate possessions, status markers, or digital followings that define us at a glance. Yet if we mistake these accoutrements for the essence of our worth, we risk losing touch with the authentic self that sustains us in adversity. It is wise, then, to cultivate a sense of identity that transcends material or aesthetic trappings, one that finds value in growth, compassion, and the pursuit of purpose beyond mere appearance. Elizabeth embraced her role with unwavering resolve, but she paid the ultimate price by doing so at the expense of her health. Her death stands as a tragic coda to a reign characterized by brilliance and determination, yet shadowed by the relentless quest for youthful perfection. As we navigate our own era, we might draw from her example both inspiration and caution. We can admire her steadfastness, her political acumen, and her refusal to be overshadowed in a male-dominated world. Simultaneously, we can heed the warning embedded in her downfall, that the uncritical pursuit of beauty, untempered by self-acceptance and health consciousness, can lead to a fate more chilling than any social slight. Ultimately, the legacy of Elizabeth I invites us to redefine beauty and power on our own terms. Let us celebrate diversity, honor the marks of lived experience, and view our life stories as integral to the textures of our appearance. Let us champion medical advancements that enhance well-being rather than amplify risk. And let us foster communities that uplift authenticity over artifice. By doing so, we carry forward a lesson centuries old, that real beauty and enduring strength arise from the harmony of body, mind, and spirit, and that no mask, however finely crafted, can replace the radiance of a life lived in truth. Although Queen Elizabeth I departed in tragedy, her legacy endured and shone brightly. She is remembered not only for her extraordinary accomplishments, but also for the profoundly human story of her life. She demonstrated that a woman could lead a nation, stand against injustice and societal prejudice, and become an enduring symbol of power. Though the pockmarks left by smallpox may have haunted her throughout her life, they also formed an integral part of the narrative of her steadfast resilience. Elizabeth's reign is often hailed as a golden age, a foundation upon which later generations built the future greatness of England. She consolidated England's position on the international stage, forging alliances and navigating delicate diplomatic waters with skill and shrewdness. Under her guidance, the arts flourished. Playwrights penned works in her honor, musicians composed courtly airs, and painters sought to capture her likeness, even as they concealed her scars beneath luxurious pigments. Her support for exploration enabled brave mariners to chart new seas, claiming distant shores for England and expanding the realm of possibility. In every sphere, political, cultural, and intellectual, Elizabeth's influence was profound and lasting. Yet it was not merely her political savvy or patronage of the arts that cemented her place in history. Elizabeth embodied a rare fusion of intelligence, courage, and unwavering determination. She addressed her subjects directly, famously declaring that she had but one mistress and no wife, thereby safeguarding her independence and crafting an image of singular devotion to her country. Her speeches to Parliament, delivered in clear, commanding tones, inspired loyalty and respect. She navigated the treacherous currents of court intrigue plots, both real and imagined, emerging unscathed, and often turning her adversaries into allies. In doing so, she became a beacon for those who believed that women could wield power effectively, a counterpoint to the prevailing notion that the throne was the sole province of men. Despite the splendor of her achievements, Elizabeth never escaped the burden of personal vulnerability. The very vanity that contributed to her decline also underscored her humanity. She was a monarch who lived under constant scrutiny, forced to maintain a flawless exterior, even as she grappled with illness, betrayal, and the relentless demands of governance. The smallpox scars that flecked her visage reminded her, and all who saw her, of life's fragility. Yet she refused to be diminished by those reminders, transforming them into symbols of her survival rather than her downfall. In portraits, poets alluded to the hidden depths beneath her alabaster skin, suggesting that wisdom and character were more enduring than any cosmetic veneer. The interplay between Elizabeth's brilliance and her vulnerabilities renders her story timeless. She enacted laws that strengthened the Church of England, ensuring religious stability after years of upheaval. She navigated the threat posed by powerful rivals, most notably the Spanish Armada, and turned potential disaster into triumph. Her unyielding stance against foreign domination bolstered national pride and helped forge a sense of collective identity among her subjects. Even as she bore the weight of a crown, she found ways to connect with her people, smiling upon pageantry, engaging with commoners, and fostering a sense of shared purpose. Elizabeth's personal sacrifices were often hidden behind the trappings of royal grandeur. In private, she endured sleepless nights pondering the fate of her realm. In public, she maintained an aura of composed confidence. The mask of youth that she so meticulously cultivated served as both armor and prison, shielding her from the scorn that might follow any visible sign of weakness, yet binding her to an ideal she could never fully realize. It was a trade-off she accepted for the sake of stability, believing that a sovereign's image could inspire as much as her decrees. When she finally passed away on the 24th of March in the year 1603, England mourned as though it had lost a parent. Her body was laid to rest with all the honours befitting a sovereign, and the pomp of her funeral procession spoke to the depth of her impact. For all the rumours and legends that sprang up around her death, the exploding coffin, the blood poisoning from her coronation ring, the enduring truth remains that Elizabeth's reign transformed England. The Elizabethan era that followed, marked by literary giants, global exploration, and economic expansion, owed much to the foundations she laid. Today, when we reflect on Elizabeth's life, we see a portrait of contradictory forces: power and fragility, vanity and principle, artifice and authenticity. Her scars, once hidden beneath layer upon layer of lead and mercury, now invite us to appreciate the fullness of her character. She reminds us that greatness can coexist with vulnerability, and that even the most formidable leaders bear wounds that shape their legacy. We learn that resilience does not require perfection. Rather, it flourishes in the acceptance of one's imperfections and the resolve to move forward in spite of them. Elizabeth's story continues to resonate because it speaks to universal themes. In every age, people confront the tension between outward appearance and inner worth. We wrestle with the same pressures: social media's curated images, cultural expectations of beauty, and the allure of quick fixes. Elizabeth's fate cautions us against sacrificing our health and well-being for the sake of an image. It encourages us to find strength in authenticity, to value wisdom over artifice, and to recognize that true leadership derives from substance rather than style. Ultimately, Queen Elizabeth I stands as both a paragon of leadership and a poignant symbol of human complexity. Her legacy of political acumen, cultural patronage, and personal resilience endures. And while the vanity that hastened her decline serves as a sobering reminder, it does not overshadow the brilliance of her reign. In remembering Elizabeth, we honor not only her triumphs, but also the lessons of her humanity. Her life invites us to lead with courage, to embrace our scars, and to pursue lasting beauty in the harmony of power and compassion. At last, Queen Elizabeth I lived a life marked by tumult from the very beginning. Cast aside as a child, she rose against all odds to become one of the greatest sovereigns England has ever known. She confronted foreign adversaries on the battlefield, outwitted conspirators within her own court, and grappled with the spectres of doubt and loneliness that haunted her private hours. Yet her final surrender did not come at the tip of a sword, nor beneath the marching banners of an invading army, but rather before an unassuming white powder Venetian ceruse, the very emblem of beauty she had pursued with such fervour and devotion. That powder, which promised the flawless complexion of a porcelain doll, slowly betrayed her. Day by day, layer upon layer, it seeped into her flesh, quietly undermining her strength. The queen who had stood unbowed before kings and parliaments ultimately faltered beneath its silent assault. In her final years, she was no longer undone by armies or plots, but by her blind devotion to an ideal that demanded nothing less than perfection. Her demise, brought about by the very cosmetic she believed would secure her eternal grace, is a poignant reminder that the greatest adversaries sometimes lurk in plain sight, disguised as allies. Elizabeth's death stands as an imperfect finale to a life of towering achievement. It illustrates that no mortal, however powerful, can entirely escape the ravages of time or the consequences of choices made in earnest. Even a monarch who steered her nation through religious upheaval, thwarted the mightiest navy of the age, and fostered an artistic renaissance could not evade the damage wrought by her own hand. She became, in a tragic twist, a prisoner of her vanity. The mask that once served as her shield ultimately became a shackle, and death offered a release from its toxic embrace. Yet to regard her story solely as a tragedy would be to overlook the indomitable spirit that defined her reign. Elizabeth's life was also a testament to perseverance and intellect. She navigated perilous tides with acuity, from the execution of a rival queen to the negotiation of treaties with foreign powers. She understood the delicate alchemy of patronage, bestowing favours and titles sparingly to maintain loyalty without sacrificing authority. In council chambers, she debated statecraft with the learned men of her day, matching wits and asserting her judgments with unwavering confidence. Her leadership was grounded not in brute force, but in nimble diplomacy, a testament to her sagacity. Her courage was equally evident in personal trials. She endured imprisonment in her youth, the constant threat of assassination, and the heartbreak of spurned suitors. Yet she transformed vulnerability into resolve, fashioning a persona that was both accessible and majestic. Her famous speeches, delivered with clarity and conviction, galvanized her people in times of crisis. When the Spanish Armada threatened to invade, it was her stirring address at Tilbury that emboldened troops and subjects alike, forging a collective resolve that turned the tide of history. Even as Elizabeth confronted the burdens of sovereignty, she recognized the power of symbolism. Her elaborate costumes, her carefully choreographed entrances, and her cultivated image all served to reinforce the authority of her crown. She wielded cosmetics and fashion as instruments of state, understanding that perception could be as potent as any edict. Yet the very mastery of that symbolism left her vulnerable to its demands. The relentless pursuit of an ideal image became, in effect, a double-edged sword. In reflecting on Elizabeth's legacy, there is a lesson for every age. Her story warns of the perils of elevating appearance over substance, of investing too heavily in facades that can obscure the truth beneath. It also celebrates the capacity of a single individual to shape an era through intelligence, courage, and unshakable will. She stands as a paragon of leadership, not only because she preserved her realm, but because she did so with a blend of force and finesse that few have matched. The final days of Elizabeth's life, spent refusing repose and succumbing to a poison of her own making, underscore the fragility of that which we hold most dear. Her physical decline was the mirror image of her triumphs, both a victory lap and a cautionary tale. The powder that granted her the visage of a goddess ultimately revealed the humanity of a woman who, despite her majesty, was bound by the same frailties that afflict every person. In that paradox lies the true power of her narrative. She was a ruler who transcended her era, yet one whose end reminds us that no crown, however ornate, can fully shield us from our own vulnerabilities. Queen Elizabeth I will forever be remembered as a sovereign of unparalleled distinction, a monarch who guided England to new heights of influence, art and exploration. Her reign laid the groundwork for the nation's future strength, fostering an environment in which literature flourished and the seafaring spirit led to global discovery. Her acts of statecraft stabilized religious tensions and asserted English independence, forging a national identity that endured long after her passing. And yet, the story of her final surrender to Venetian Ceruse remains a powerful coda. It invites us to examine our own pursuits, our quests for beauty, validation, and permanence in a world where ideals can become idols and devotion can morph into downfall. It reminds us that every gift carries a shadow. That which bestows may also betray. But most of all, her life encourages us to embrace complexity, to honor both strength and vulnerability, and to find value beyond the masks we wear. In the gentle hush of history's twilight, Elizabeth's memory endures. We see her not merely as the Virgin Queen whose visage glowed in countless portraits, but as a woman of flesh and blood, who braved exile and intrigue, who commanded fleets and counseled with thinkers, and who ultimately paid a price for the perfection she sought. Her story fuses magnificence with melancholy, triumph with tragedy, and it stands as a testament to the heights a human spirit can reach and the depths to which it can fall. Thus, when we recount the life of Elizabeth I, we celebrate her extraordinary achievements, even as we heed the warning woven into her final chapter. Her name lives on in the annals of history, not as a flawless icon, but as a fully human figure whose legacy challenges us to balance ambition with wisdom, glory with humility, and the pursuit of ideals with the acceptance of our own imperfection. In that balance lies the true measure of greatness and the enduring power of her story. As we draw this journey to a close, let us reflect on what today's video has offered you. By exploring the life and final days of Queen Elizabeth I, we have uncovered more than a distant historical anecdote. We have witnessed the timeless interplay between aspiration and consequence. You have seen how even the most powerful ruler, one who navigated rebellions, threats, and the grandeur of empire, could become ensnared by the very standards of beauty she sought to uphold. In Elizabeth's story, we find a mirror for our own lives, a cautionary illustration of how the pursuit of an ideal can both inspire greatness and, if left unchecked, lead to unseen harm. From the layers of lead-white ceruse to the gleaming coronation ring that cut into her poisoned flesh, each symbol of Elizabeth's authority also carried a hidden price. Today's video reminds us that every decision we make, whether about cosmetics, careers, or personal goals, carries consequences beyond its immediate promise. You have learned how social pressures, cultural fashions, and the desire to maintain an image can shape decisions in the most intimate corners of our existence. Yet, you have also seen Elizabeth's remarkable resilience, her ability to govern a nation, foster the arts, and stand firm in the face of intrigue and adversity. The message we take away is twofold. First, recognize that striving for excellence, whether in appearance, profession, or personal conduct, can be a force for good when tempered by self-awareness and balance. Elizabeth's support of exploration, literature, and religious stability demonstrates how vision and leadership can uplift an entire people. In our modern world, we too can channel ambition into positive change by cultivating our talents, supporting our communities, and embracing our unique voices, rather than masking them behind a flawless facade. Second, remember that self-care and authenticity are at the heart of lasting well-being. Elizabeth's tragic end underlines the dangers of sacrificing health for a transient ideal. Today, as we scroll through filtered images and read glowing testimonials for the latest beauty treatments, we must ask ourselves, at what cost do we pursue perfection? By valuing our physical and mental health over unattainable standards, we safeguard the very foundation upon which our dreams are built. This video's value to you, our viewer, lies in its invitation to pause and reassess. Let it inspire you to examine the masks you wear, whether literal or metaphorical, and to consider which ones serve your growth and which ones hold you back. Let it remind you that your story, with all its imperfections, carries its own dignity and strength. Just as Elizabeth's smallpox scars became badges of survival rather than marks of shame, your challenges and scars can become sources of empathy, wisdom, and genuine connection. In practical terms, you might begin by setting realistic standards for yourself. seeking expert advice before embracing any drastic change, and fostering a community that celebrates diversity rather than uniformity. You can choose to share your unfiltered self, encouraging others to do the same, and in doing so, transform the culture around you toward greater acceptance. By balancing aspiration with self-compassion, you can achieve personal growth without sacrificing your health or authenticity. Ultimately, Elizabeth's life and death speak to the delicate balance between power and vulnerability, ambition and humility. Her legacy endures not only in the history books, but in the lessons it offers every one of us. As you close your eyes tonight, let her story remind you that true beauty arises from confidence, courage, and the acceptance of one's own humanity. Finally, good night if you're still awake. May your dreams be restful and your reflections kind. If you enjoyed this exploration, please subscribe to our channel and tap the bell icon so you won't miss our newest and best videos. Sleep well, and we'll see you next time.